Yo, what up? What up? What up? What up? I go by the name of NFT QT or QuHarrison Terry, whichever one you know me by. Today we are on episode 27 of the NFT QT
Episode
show.
27, my friend.
Yeah, this is episode 27. We have our regular guest of the hour, Mr. Cowdrey.
Degular.
Yeah,
That's a
regular
new word
degular.
to me.
So I feel like you're a regular degular at this point. Like, you're on on pretty much every form of content in the NFT QT universe. You might as well just be a part of the NFT QT.
I hope so. I keep you honest. I keep
You
you in
do
check
that. You do. And you keep me consistent, right? You make sure that I show up. So, I mean,
for
for
sure. And,
everyone,
I always make sure that before we get going, we talk about
the
our
NFT
presenting
handbook.
sponsor.
Eh, This is the NFT handbook. If you haven't gotten yourself an NFT handbook, well, I'm a little disappointed. I'm the author of the NFT handbook, and what's interesting about this book is, twofold. One, it's a book that we wrote to teach you how to buy, create, and sell NFTs. But the thing about it that I enjoy the most is the whole concept of, understanding the terminology. When we created this book, we did it with the mindset of, hey, there's people out there that don't know what the heck an NFT is, right? And if they don't know and they don't know where to start, at least there's a book or an audio book or some videos that can help them get going. And so NFT literacy, it's a big deal to me. I appreciate you checking out the book. If you know everything about NFTs, I recommend you go give this to someone that you think should learn about NFTs. So that way they don't have to text you and bug you all day about what an NFT is, or, how do you create an NFT, or what's a mint
Hey,
and all that good stuff.
spend the $20 to save yourself hours.
Exactly. So we've seen people in the community, say great things about it. If you're enjoying it or you're just cracking it open, feel free to tag me on Twitter or Instagram or whatever. I'll shout you out because I love seeing people start their NFT journeys. So Cowdrey, man, we're gonna get into an NFT show here soon, and I'm excited because we're gonna be talking about Richard Bernstein and his impact in not only the art world but also now what it looks like the NFT and metaverse space. And for those that are joining and listening to us, we're going to be joined by Rory, who is the president of the Richard Bernstein Estate.
Mhm.
And in this show, I want to definitely talk about, what it means to be a fine traditional artist and, have people look up to your work. But then, your estate, you're not here. Your estate has to make the best modifications to your work to turn it into NFTs and really get behind it. Like, we're in this world where like post-humanist NFTs are a thing, right? And
Yeah.
we've seen it. This isn't the first. This is the first time we had someone on the show that can speak to that from a definitive standpoint. But the thing that really makes this show interesting to me, and why I'm most excited to just even have this conversation, is we're at this point where we can talk about legacy and the metaverse, right?
Mhm.
And so, people can own digital objects. That's what, NFTs have largely brought us. So there's this now whole concept of digital ownership. So digital masterpieces, whether it be from a fine artist or someone that you're just uh, meeting for the first time, you can now say, "Oh, I definitively own this digital masterpiece, and it's protected because of the blockchain." Now, I'm stuck because when we think about the metaverse, we don't really think about legacies or, estates, or, a lot of the stuff I've
No.
seen has just been, cool crypto stuff.
Yeah, you think of games and you think of like,
Yeah.
how do I keep somebody in here for 10, 20 minutes playing a game that they want to come back to, tell people about? You're not really thinking about necessarily an education or like, bringing people who have never heard of you up to speed on, what impact this person had for a decade or 2 decades or 3 decades, or maybe who they even influenced. And I think that's where I kind of get stuck is like, I feel for some of these estates because it's like you want to bring on this person, help this person's legacy that live on, right? And you want them to still be relevant. And you have this new flashy object called an NFT, and then you have this even flashier object called the metaverse, where you can create an immersive experience. And I'm kind of like in that mode where it's or that middle ground where it's like, okay, how do you to use blatant terms, how do you not fuck it up, right? Like you have this artist who, if they were around right now, they already showed that they had big grand ideas when they were alive. And if they were still around, they would have done something like a Damien Hirst, a big idea that kind of like blows people's pants off and is just very from the mind of an artist who thinks differently, right? And now you have people who are trying to essentially think like that artist. How do you even do that?
Well, I mean, it's a tough question. The states have had to deal with it for, quite some time here. The thing that stands out to me though is just the amount of optionality that you have in these metaverse environments where, I think about Ready Player One, and every time I think about the metaverse, I always think about the scene in Ready Player One
I'm
where they
already
go
knowing
to
what you're gonna say.
where they go to the library. You know what I'm
Yep.
talking about? The
Yep.
library scene. I love that scene because to me that's what a metaverse is. It's a big library where people go and they experience things for the first time, as they happened in a historical context or in a previous timeline. Because what we have now is like this formats shift, right? Like when Richard Bernstein, um, the artist whose estate we'll be talking to today, like he made work like 40 years ago, right? And you can't take that work from 40 years ago and then say this is ultra HD 8K. Like, of course, you can upscale, and we've seen that done, but
Mhm.
he didn't build with the tools that we have today. So, how do you respect that? How do you showcase the medium and the formats in a way that is intuitive and it feels natural? And I think the library in Ready Player One, at least in the movie, it did a great job of saying like, hey, like, this is an older video, but like this is how the kids are gonna look at it. And then like here's
Mhm.
like this audio tape, or here's this recording, or here's this room as it was, because we have some images and we can recreate that.
Mhm.
Um, you're gonna
Well,
need to do that for people that we look like icons. Like I always like I think we've had this conversation before. I talk about people that have really changed the world. Rest in peace to Virgil. Rest in peace to Chadwick Boseman. And we've lost a lot of greats this year, unfortunately. But rest in peace to all the people that have died. What is fascinating about that in today's society is you can see the impact that you've had on the world in near real time. I mentioned Virgil and Chadwick because, Chadwick Boseman is a great example of what representation looks like. There's a
mhm.
lot of people that now know Black Panther, and not only like this is a comic book hero that not a lot of people knew about, especially at the scale that we've now seen it, right? Like no one would have ever thought Black Panther was $1 billion franchise, but Chadwick did an incredible job of bringing that character to life. And and Marvel and Disney got behind him and really just did something special, incredible, and it opened up a whole world of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics for the people that don't know that. To a generation of kids that are gonna go and have an impact on the world, right? And it's the same reason why even in the background I've got a Black Panther helmet in there because of the significance, right? Like it and even in my lifetime it had that impact. I mentioned Virgil again because Virgil Abloh represents what it means to literally be a creative, go out, change things, experiment in real time, and create in public, and as you build, get better, but like grow a community while doing that. And like I mean, I'm simplifying it, but like if you're not familiar with Virgil and you just only know him for Off White, you're very severely limited in just the magnitude of what this guy touched and how he influenced just culture at a level that we probably won't see again for some time. And I mentioned both of these guys because what they had is an impact. Their impact was felt in the material world, and I think anybody in this generation can point to something that you can see and be like, "Oh wow, this has that influence." Digitally, they can be felt in on Instagram and Facebook, and Web 2.0 has done a great job of just kind of saying like, "Oh, okay, this is in memory of Virgil, this is in that."
Yeah,
But when
and you
you
can
go,
almost quantify it too. You can actually quantify the impact that they had after they've passed because, oh, how many people wrote a post that said "Rest in peace, Virgil" when he died? And
yeah,
you can instantly say, oh, 10 million people posted this exact same thing. There's at least 10 million people that were touched by him.
Yeah, I mean, even more like, yeah, just 10 million people that talked about it, and not
Yeah.
even the people that you can't even track. But yes, like you can do like a Google Trends analysis on it, right? Which is
Hmm.
crazy. I never even thought about that. But when you go into the metaverse and you start to say, like, what about the people that weren't Virgil, right? But that had like a Virgil like impact on society? We
Hmm.
didn't grow up in that time frame, right? Like I went to a museum once and they did an exhibit. It was all about the 60s. I learned so much about the 1960s just from that museum exhibit. I learned more about the 60s in that exhibit than I did in the actual class that we had to take in social studies. And it was mind-blowing to me because I'm like, damn, like, social studies, like they kind of failed me a little bit. I didn't know all these things happen simultaneously at this really character defining moment for American history. But like the metaverse allows people to actually experience that in a way that is very similar to a museum, right? Because it's fully
Yep.
immersive. You can build, you can recreate, you can showcase, clips or images and videos and things of that nature. And so when you have estates and they go back and they say, okay, how do we keep the vision going? How do we bring the impact? I think being able to tell the story behind the story in a way where you can control the variables and where things go. Legacy in the metaverse is something that there's going to be a company, a team, a creative that's going to say, this is how we should think about it. And just like how we have tombstones today to memorialize people and keep them in our memories, we're going to have some token of appreciation that basically honors your digital existence, and that's going to be carried on in the metaverse. And I think estates are taking the first shots at that today, but we're going to see just all the efforts get compiled, and from those compiled efforts, we're going to see some really true, crazy, impactful things.
Absolutely. I mean, it very much could be the evolution of the Wikipedia page, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yes.
everybody who's had some sort of impact on the world has a Wikipedia page, and it's linear, right? You tell the story of them, but it's mostly just through words. There's a few images here and there, but it doesn't necessarily, it, it doesn't allow you to talk about multiple parallel timelines happening at the same time, and this is something where with the metaverse, you can kind of break the space time continuum, right? And you can say, Richard created this work at this point in time. And at that same point in time, this group of people was making this work. And this is how they were influenced by each other. And you can kind of almost, create, uh, like you said, you can recreate that moment in time that isn't necessarily bound by just writing a paragraph in a textbook that says this is what was happening, right? You can actually show a visual of all these different pieces that are happening around the same time that influence this person's work and how they influence then the people right after them.
For sure, for sure. I mean, this is we're getting deep. I mean, we've been talking about this for a while. Like, I mean, the last one of the last episodes we've recorded, we talked about what it means to leave a legacy, and what happens to your data and your NFTs when you die.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that is a good question. Like I think we should even go deeper and talk about, I've seen some AI. Remember Replica AI?
Hmm.
Yeah, where like they created a chat bot from all your text and like, your
Yeah.
written material, and like, it was something so that like if someone passed away, you should be able to like, at least convert with like um an AI replica of that person. And obviously it's
Yeah.
not the same thing, but it's crazy where technology is taking us and how you will be able to uh cope with just the term that you're just gonna we're gonna I think what's happened here is COVID forced us all to go down a path and really think about, what does it mean to lose someone, and how do you deal with death, and how do you grieve. And the technology around us was a tool, and we're starting to see those tools manifest in new ways to grieve, right? And it doesn't have to be so lonely, especially now when we've all dealt with some significant losses. And I think about the metaverse and honoring your loved ones in a way that isn't just a tombstone. There's some people that unfortunately, they don't want to be buried in a grave, right? It's unfortunate for the businesses there, but it's like you should honor the loved one or your cherished one, however you feel is best, or however they wanted you to do that. And how you cope and grieve, you need to do it in a healthy way, ideally. And sometimes, everybody can't do it in a healthy way. It's just too much. But the tools that are popping up, they're making it a lot easier, right? One, the technology that is just being implemented, the things that we're thinking about, they're tough and very paralyzing at times, but they're necessary tools because it'll be very, very cool to be able to enter someone's world as they left it. Remember in Ready Player One, where they went back to the main the programmer's his room as he
Mhm.
left it, and it was like a exact replica, and they were able to find all the things as they existed. I
Yep.
think that's going to be more true. It's like, what was Virgil Studio like? Imagine putting on a metaverse headset, and you're able to see all the things that are there. And I say that because when Virgil passed, I ended up getting his book. It's called Abloisms, um, and it's just like a lot of just things that, like, all of his thoughts on life, like, just collected in a book. And obviously this was written before he passed, but it's one of those things where, like, we've already done that in the real world, right?
Mhm.
We just now need to see that being implemented in the digital world, or the metaverse as we're calling it.
Definitely. Well, I think we should get Rory from the Richard Bernstein Estate into the show now. Talk to him, figure out what they're planning, and chop some ideas up.
Let's do it.
Rory.
What up, guys? What up? What up? And by the way, I have my NFT QT handbook here too.
Oh, you got it. You got it. There we go.
Of course, of
Look up,
course. That's it.
I love it. I love it. Welcome, man. I mean, for the people that are just joining us and they're not so sure about Richard Bernstein, could you just do a quick background on who is Richard Bernstein?
Sure. So, first, thank you guys for having me on. And Yeah, so Richard Bernstein, he's probably the artist best known for doing the covers of Andy Warhol's Enterby magazine between 1972 to 1989. And he also had a fine art career starting in 1965. A lot of his works are kind of iconic and well known from there. But really, his relationship with Andy is probably, what he's obviously best known for. And, Andy is just a juggernaut. And, yeah. So that's kind of a little bit about Richard in a nutshell.
So, as the president of the Richard Bernstein Estate, like, what does your typical day to day look like?
So it's a great question. So I mean, I really started. Richard was my uncle, I should say, and I was always surrounded by his art. And I had a career in finance for 15 years, and what I really kind of realized is that as an artist, they leave behind this legacy of this incredible art, and really, it's dependent upon the heirs or somebody else to really perpetuate their art, and to have new people come to the forefront. So, I created it for that purpose, is to share his art with the world and the community, and not have his art really die. So, day to day, I'm reaching out to museums and galleries to do shows. I did a collaboration with Coach a couple of years ago for their spring summer 2020 collection, and J Lo was rocking some of the stuff, so that was really cool. And yeah, so I just I try to get his art out there as much as possible, whether through brands or galleries or museums.
Oh, that's
Definitely.
super cool. And you are, the president of the Richard Bernstein Estate. You see all the craze that happens with NFTs last year. You're starting to pay attention to it. At what point did you start to say, "Hey, this NFT thing is something I should take serious"?
So, I mean, for me, and I think a lot of people in the fine art world kind of, took a step back when they saw what people did at auction. And we were like, whoa, this is for real. And I think that was just an explosion for so many people, and especially in like the fine art world where they just had to take notice. I think before they were like, oh, this is like a JPEG, this is a joke. But then when something sells for $69 million, they're like, hey, wait a minute. So, I mean, that was kind of me. And I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, too, Richard was so pioneering in, the work that he did. And Andy was too, right? So, Andy, with the silk screens, and then even in your handbook, you guys talk about how Andy and the Amiga computer was like one of the first. But in truth, and maybe there's going to be a revision to this handbook, I hope, is that Richard is actually the first pop artist to really create digital artwork.
Hmm.
There was a computer in 1981 that came out called the Quantel Paint Box, and there's actually a really cool documentary that people could watch on YouTube with David Hockney using it. And in 1983, Richard created a portrait of David Bowie, which was actually the first pop art work done on a computer. And
I didn't know that. Ryan, did you know that?
I read it when I was kind of researching Richard. I was like, one, I was fascinated, and then two, there was a little bit of drama around it too, where wasn't it they wanted to use it for a cover, but then David was like, no, don't use it. Wasn't there some drama around it?
There was, yeah. So, Richard and Bowie, they were friends for a while. Bowie actually went to a couple of Richard's art openings in the mid 70s, and Bowie talks about it in his diaries. And that was always somebody that Richard wanted to do a portrait of. But for whatever reason, Andy would always kind of blow him off and say, "Yeah, I'm not going to put you on the cover of Interview," which is kind of strange because Andy's sort of famous for always telling everybody that they would be on the cover of Interview magazine. But it was really up to like the people that ran Interview, like Bob Colacello and Vincent Fremont, who would say, "You can't be on, but somebody else can." So, Richard was advocating for Bowie, and it just never happened. So Richard was like, you know what? I'm going to just create my own portrait of Bowie. And it was featured in Richard's book that he made in 1984 called Megastars. And, and yeah, that's kind of how the Bowie came about. And that was, Andy died in 87. So he never got to be on the cover of Interview.
Man. So talk to us. I want to get into like a lot of the futuristic stuff after we talk a little bit about what you guys are up to. So could you kind of describe, you're getting into the NFT space. Describe this NFT drop that you guys are doing.
Sure. So, we're doing three different images. We're doing the Grace Jones, which is actually the edition of 50. And
Okay. Sorry, got that wrong.
oh, no problem. All good. So that was done for the cover of 1984 for Interview magazine. And really, Richard was best friends with Grace Jones. He was the godfather of Grace's child, Paolo. And, as you can see, Grace is behind me too. She was around my life too growing up. She was a fantastic person. And, really Richard was instrumental in her career, and he, dressed her and created all these like wonderful portraits. And this is actually my favorite portrait that Richard did of Grace because, it really kind of shows her, her fierceness, but also her vulnerability. And I think that's really only something that Richard really could have captured because he knew her so intimately well. And then the other drop we're doing is the Andy Warhol wallpaper, which is the edition of 10. And so we're doing that in 10 different colorways. And that's because Richard, when he was creating this, had 10 different colors that he was going to use before he did this final one here. So we're introducing that as like kind of like behind the scenes in the archives, like, what his process was. And then the one of one edition, we're doing the Andy Warhol with red paint. And that's what Richard made on the Quantel computer in 1990. And it debuted in 1992 at a gallery in Beverly Hills, curated by Joan Quinn, who a lot of people in the fine art world know who she is. She's a prolific collector, and she actually sold an Ed Ruscha Hurting the World Radio #2 a couple of years ago for, I think it was like 50 or $60 million, something ridiculous like that. But yeah, so those are the drops.
Interesting. I'm very curious. Like, you're the president. We've seen a couple other, estates kind of get into the NFT space. Some good, not so good. What were some of those hurdles like? To essentially take this, this work and create a posthumous NFT.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, it made a lot of sense, right? Considering that he was working with digital artwork, before he passed. And that was, in the later part of his career in the 90s, and he passed in 2002. So from like 1990 until he passed, he was working on computers. So for me, it was like a natural, easy progression to, kind of introduce his work to this whole new audience of NFTs. I think some other artists maybe have a hurdle of, yeah, estates rather having that hurdle because maybe their artwork didn't do that and they're just putting up a JPEG of, what the artist created. And they're like, well, now this is a NFT. This I think is a little bit different because it's actually, done with a computer and, he had that forethought and that pioneering aspect to his career.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, what comes to mind when I was thinking about it was there was a Basquiat drawing that this was way back, I think April 2021, that dropped on OpenSea, and the whole catch of it was whoever won the auction was going to get to burn had the choice to burn the original or the NFT, and they had a pretty high price tag. It was like 50 ETH or something. It sat there for about a week, and then the estate kind of comes back around like, no, we actually don't want to do this. You never had our permission to do it. And it kind of just created this drama where it was like, okay, did anybody actually have the permission? Or was this something where it was like, let's test the waters? And then all of a sudden it didn't go as they planned and they kind of redacted it. And so I'm just very curious, what are those kind of those types of hurdles when you're talking about, an artist's estate, now transitioning to this new form of IP generation? Like, what was that process like? Were there other people you had to convince of this?
Well, so the estate is comprised of my mother, who is Richard's sister, and my brother, who, um, you know, he's in finance and he kind of defers everything to me as far as that, and my mother too. So, I mean, really, like, the sole decision maker of the estate, but I, consult them, and they thought that this was, a great idea to introduce to just a new community of people who may not know of Richard's work, who you know again, like Richard, was really, like I said, that pioneering artist who created, the first digital artwork in the pop art world, and nobody really knows about it. So, for me to be able to voice that and to get that across and, to educate people is, an awesome thing. I think with Basquiat, I do think that, I think it's run by his sisters, I believe. And they were probably testing the water, right? I mean, Basquiat, he's obviously a huge name, an incredible artist. But it doesn't translate to an NFT because he wasn't working with computers, right? So I think, maybe they were just kind of testing that out and seeing, a different revenue and avenue. And, I've met some other artist estates that are doing NFTs and that are also, trying to get into it, but it may not make as much sense in a way, that I think mine does. But I think some people and some living artists are doing a tremendous job. David Sally, I think, is doing a great job getting into the NFTs. And, Damien Hirst obviously had his drop with the currency and, some other things. And I think they're transitioning quite well. I think for an artist estate, it's a little bit more difficult. And I think those hurdles are certainly there for a lot of them.
So, I mean, how do you think about like activating the community, right? When you have, an NFT, an artist, someone that really can't speak for it, you have to speak on their behalf to at least influentially, or like to at least influence and build a community. Where's your head at there?
Yeah, so I mean, I think, for me, because we have a lot of things going on with the estate, I think, to build a community, like every token holder of these NFTs, they're going to have the VIP access to a print exhibition that we're having in May. And so we're going to be also giving out some like rare books and some things from the archives to kind of like build up the base as well. And we're going to be dropping, some things later on in the future for them as well. And just, for me, it's really about, spreading Richard's art and his message and, yeah, just trying to get out there as much as I can for it.
So, do you see like the opportunity here being able to like build a legacy in the metaverse per se?
Yeah, no, I mean, 100%. So, you know, one thing that I want to do, is, really kind of create this community where it's like going into Studio 54 or the back room of Max's Kansas City and having that kind of a feel of, having those people who lived during that time, but also have like new people come up and like perform music and, just create this whole universe that, so that's the future plans for us here.
No, I mean that's a very ambitious and like, it's a huge opportunity, right? Like someone's gonna land it, but the people that are gonna land it and figure it out, they're starting right now. So it's exciting to see this. Like, what was the most helpful resource for you to really wrap your head around NFTs?
So, I mean, not just because I'm on your podcast here, but I mean, quite honestly, your handbook was tremendously helpful, and really just talking to other people too, and seeing what projects they're doing, and just I'm on Twitter now for the last month. I'm very new to Twitter, but just like hanging out in Twitter Spaces and reading people's threads, it's been like really educational and eye opening, and people are doing some really cool things out there, really interesting. So,
when
um,
when you when you look at like just Twitter, because I mean it's its own culture, right? Like NFT Twitter is something that you know you either love it or you hate it, right? And
all
you're
right,
you're 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 dropping in there, you're seeing it fresh set of eyes. You know what community stands out to you? Because there's different like there's a lot of PFPs. There's a lot of
yeah.
people that believe in like layer two solutions. There's a lot of tokens that are even very popularized in that space. Like what jumps at you? What's calling you right now? Because I think that that's also going to have some influence on the project, ideally, right?
Yeah, no, certainly. So, I mean, I think, for me, I've been hanging out a lot in the NFT photography spaces. And I feel like that's very interesting. And that's probably the most parallel to, Richard and his work too. Cause, these interview magazine covers and, this Grace Jones behind me, they started off with a photograph either by Richard or by a famous photographer, and then they would give it to Richard and he would airbrush it and paint it, right? So I think what people are doing with, photography and photographs is really interesting. So I've been hanging out a lot in those spaces. And, a lot of people have a lot of interesting stories to share. Some are inspiring, some are very tragic. But it's been, really cool to see. And I think, it really made this whole art world really like, accessible to a lot of people and egalitarian. And I think it's an amazing, beautiful thing to see and watch. And super excited about it.
Well, we're gonna get involved with the NFT drop. I'll try to see if I can get one. And what I'll do is I'll put it up in my metaverse that's coming soon.
I appreciate it, man. I appreciate it.
No, I mean beyond that, we're excited, and it's one of those things where we'll be watching from our end, and we will definitely catch you at the drop. And thank you for taking the time. I think what's fascinating here is whenever we get a chance to see um, the traditional art world get influenced and get connected with the NFT tech world, I do think that there's opportunity there, right? Like there is an opportunity to say, hey, they don't get it, they're old, they're washed. And I think that if you do that, you have a very nascent understanding of what art is, and in the community that art has continued to uh, manifest for generations, right? Like even with the estate, you're upholding, Richard's legacy, and you're what, the third generation?
Second.
Second, so my bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're the second. You're on the second generation. That's
Right.
incredible, right? Like we don't even really see that in tech, right? Like so, there's a lot that tech can learn from the art side, and where we're at with it. I just think that some of the value that has been exchanged in like the pure like NFT crypto side of things is definitely absurd, right? Like I think that
Mm.
there's some crazy high prices, but I do think that the art market is not far behind, right? Like when art really figures out NFTs and when blue chip NFTs are an established thing that people can know and understand and talk to and relate to, we're going to start to see the prices, I think, also catch up from the art side.
Hmm. Yeah, I want to touch on one last thing too. With the, we talked about building a legacy in the metaverse. It's kind of like almost a second chance, right? To have your art hit a different audience, potentially hit a blue chip status of some sort, and really create a new cool factor, right? pop art kind of had its time. We were influenced by it, and then we kind of transitioned out of it, right? And now you're saying, hey, here was this guy who was my uncle. He did a lot of really cool things. The average person doesn't know who he is. The art world probably knows who he is, but how can we kind of bring it? And I look at a guy, or what you're doing, like with the NFT or the wallpaper. Like, I think that fits very interestingly to the metaverse, right? You think about all these different galleries that are popping up and people designing their own spaces. It's like, okay, can every single small bit and piece within that, little metaverse environment be an NFT, from the wallpaper to the floorboards to the, whatever, the lampshades. I don't know. Like, all these little small idiosyncrasies in an environment could essentially be, influenced by somebody else's artwork that now is, turned into a desk. Kind of like how Supreme does it. Supreme just takes all of these random objects, slaps their brand on it, and now it's the coolest thing. Like, I'm gonna go and buy a Supreme screwdriver. I could very much see the same thing for pop art, which was consumer goods, essentially like flipped in this new art aesthetic. I guess I mean, what do you think about that? Or Q, I mean, any ideas there?
Yeah, I mean, so I could tell you, like, Richard, you know, he probably would have loved this whole NFT, right? And creating, like, what we're doing with the wallpaper. So, I mean, Richard created sculptures because he loved, the 3D aspect of it. I don't know if you guys could see the pills behind me. He did that with Paloma Picasso in the mid 1960s, and he had these like big pill sculptures. And he wrote in his journals how he was really fascinated by the 3D aspect of it. And so I think creating a universe and creating these things that move, and creating like this fine art world and bridging that gap into this NFT and the metaverse, he would have been all about it. And I think it's really fascinating, to be a part of and to kind of carry that torch for him.
Well, especially too with, like, when you think about, I like this as kind of a difference, right? Where Richard is in this interesting space where he's known by the people who should know him. He's not known by the people who don't know, who should probably know who he is. Um,
Mhm.
and now you get the second chance to essentially, like, kind of, you know, uh, and I'm just going to go off on a tangent here. I don't know if this is in your plans or anything, but you could essentially create, the museum of Richard Bernstein, or, the metaverse space of Richard Bernstein, and really create, the upgraded version of a Wikipedia page where it's now like, hey, check out this VR space that I built around my uncle who did all this awesome, great stuff. I don't want you to just go and watch a couple YouTube videos or go on a Wikipedia page. I'm going to curate this space. I'm going to teach you about it. And that has, like, a lot of, interesting pathways for, education, bringing up the youth on, something that happened throughout history that, you know, shouldn't just be consumed in a textbook, but should be consumed in almost like real life.
Yeah, I
I mean,
love that
yeah,
idea.
yeah, no, absolutely. I think you hit it on the head. And when the whole NFT thing came about on my radar, I really thought about that, and really, this is my opportunity to really like build Richard's legacy, like beyond what the traditional art world knows of him. And you're absolutely right. Like, I can create a whole metaverse of, the Museum of Richard Bernstein and a museum of pop art. And he was instrumental for Andy and all these celebrities. And I think this provides me with the opportunity to really do it. So it's awesome.
Well, we're excited for the drop. We're gonna catch you in the future on that one, and thank you for making the time. This has been a great show.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I appreciate it. And thank you for all that you guys do and educating people, and getting people up to speed. And it's awesome, man. So thank you again.